Today is the 8th of June, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel and go to my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribell.com. If you're gonna leave a comment, make sure to have etiquette and respect. So I was listening to a few YouTube channel clips in regards to various news sources. And in one, they're discussing the 6th of January sedition in regards of the court process, which is an irony for a few reasons. One would be, that would be around the time frame, now granted this is in reference to 2021, as far as the January 6th claim regarding that whole fiasco. January 6th would be about the time frame that I had walked into in the year of 2009, International SCUBA in regards of Carrollton, Texas, and where they did not know that, yes, I'm medically retired from the Army, I'm a sponsor, so they didn't know about my blue ID card, which would translate to they only had one person to ask in regards of whether or not I would ever accept their if there were to be any needless problems, such as any needless games, childish situations, and those particular factors in regards of how I earned 26 scuba diving certifications on my own, as well as my work in those particular references throughout the time frame, because I had informed them of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 in the year of 2009, which they were informed that I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain that had been in the viewpoint of the MRI up until about 6 months prior to me walking into International SCUBA in that area of Carrollton, Texas, which they also knew that my son had been born only 1 year after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. They were also informed that my daughter was born 2 years after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, when I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. Now, that would definitely be an insurrection in quite a few ways, because they had also been informed that I'm a Republican. They had also been informed that I had voted for Senator John McCain as well as Governor Sarah Palin. And so while in the time frame as to the current factors of what will be broadcast in reference to the jury trial, those individuals in reference to that civilian recreational type of lazy scuba diving as per their own descriptions as to that style, as well as the Don't California, Texas signs in regards of the 2020 election cycle, and those particular factors, I was informed by an individual from a different scuba diving location about a female named Amanda, which, duh, she happened to be one of those individuals regarding one of my 26 earned scuba diving certifications. And while they tried to push for me to become an instructor, I wasn't interested in becoming an instructor because of energetic sensations as to those types of irresponsible, childish individuals, in my opinion. And so while I dealt with a bunch of needless problems in reference to, and they had no legal right to ever go and speak with anybody regarding my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological little sister, those individuals were not informed that I had a blue ID card, which in that reference, additionally, they were not allowed to go speak with my ex-in-laws because I didn't give them permission to. And so in those particular references, yes, while I have done some modeling in those references, not really wanting to because of this vision that I had, and I had informed these individuals as far as those particular civilian recreational scuba divers, as per their description. They said it was recreational scuba diving and they're civilians. So that's how that translates to civilian recreational scuba diver. They also said that their form of scuba diving would be considered as lazy, and definitely in comparison comparison to my style of scuba diving, where I had earned 26 scuba diving certifications from the time frame officially beginning classes at the end of January in the time frame of 2009 into what should have been September of 2009, though because of certain factors, the certification wasn't until November of 2009, which was a choice made by someone who should have been on my scuba diving certification card for cavern scuba diving in comparison to who was put on there, because of the hypothetical factors as to what was not ever their right to involve themselves. And that I definitely would consider as sedition, as well as the other factors in regards of the hypothetical reference to endangerment of 2 minors, as well as ADA compliance issues in those particular references, because they were informed as to the facts regarding the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. And while in this particular reference as to the metaphor regarding that, those individuals as to what should have occurred has yet to occur. And yet I've brought several factors forward in regards of my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, which is on my website, www.susanmeeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Now, in regards of how it was reported through MSNBC that Fox News might not broadcast the live factors as to, similarly, those individuals made the choice as to how they viewed the time frame during President of the United States of America 44, Barack Obama's presidency, as to their particular viewpoint in comparison to mine. And any situations as to those types of people that can be found through the technological factors, because duh, in reference to technology, there is always a multitude of records everywhere. And so those particular references in conjunction to the year 2004, when I had informed my biological mother and biological father and biological little sister, in conjunction to a few people such as Emily and Arnold, and the area such as Caroline regarding to Gil, about the situations in my backyard, in comparison to actually speaking with the one and only person who would ever be capable to give that permission. Whatever choices in this hypothetical that those people made is whatever choices those people need to be held accountable for, because the accountability for their stupidity is their responsibility, in my particular opinion. Now, I do appreciate the fact of any individual who might actually be protective of me in comparison to what needless problems occurred, because obviously individuals who would cause needless problems such as McCoy Elementary School, Fort Worth Zoo situation, as well as the particular factors in reference to the special needs education that I made attempts to make sure my daughter, as to that elementary school age. I don't know if those civilian recreational scuba divers and or other Democrats have a problem understanding what elementary school would be. I would guesstimate that at some point in time they had attended an elementary school, and while they may have attended an elementary school, I don't know if they ever grew up their intellectual mindset above elementary school level. Now, in comparison, I earned 26 scuba diving certifications to ensure that I could actually re-educate myself, because I had already been working on that prior to having moved out to the Carrollton, Texas area in the state of Texas from the city of San Antonio, which again, I would not, nor have I ever given permission to individuals, which would be considered as stalking and harassment by the legal standards, as to any factors in reference to the needless aspects as to recording me, because I wouldn't ever consent to that unless it was under certain circumstances, because of my rights to choose as far as those privacy aspects. And then in conjunction, as a biological female, pansexual, half Chinese, 5 Native American background, among several other factors as to different ethnic minorities, that form of bigotry, which would be the definition of, in this hypothetical, to those particular factors, as well as sexism in those references, because there are females that are capable of being sexist towards other females, such as in the reference of the hypothetical to Amanda Thomas and Patty Stewart and other females in those particular regards, because no feminist would ever do that to some other female, because a feminist actually believes in uplifting in comparison to causing a bunch of needless problems. However, being a single mom at that time frame and those particular factors as to what if those people were actually responsible scuba divers in comparison to civilian recreational scuba divers, what I had brought forward a multitude of times in reference to several scuba diving situations, those individuals who have not ever had my permission, nor will they ever have my permission, in regards of the factors in this hypothetical as to such situations, is the reality. And so while my son, my daughter, and I were displaced because of the situations regarding McCoy Elementary School and their failures as to the special needs program that I had made attempts to get for my daughter from the year of 2008 into the year of 2009, as well as in the year of 2010, before the Fort Worth Zoo situation, those individuals have had only one person to speak with only. And that one person would be myself, and that's it. So in reference to my scuba diving, while individuals might wish and hope and pray in regards of my viewpoints to whatever capacities of, my reality is my reality. And so while they can wish as far as that I would change my mind, well, they can continue to keep wishing. While they might hope that the truth would come forward, I would 100% concur in those particular factors. While they might pray, well, I don't know whether or not they would actually do that correctly in that hypothetical situation, especially in regards of a few different factors. So, in the references to the January 6, 2021 situation as to that sedition, well, that would definitely be a different version of a metaphor to take into consideration. And while they would have that Hollywood type of view because of those pop culture types of individuals that would think that that would be something that would ever be important enough to someone such as myself, which again, I didn't grow up with that sort of stuff, that sort of viewpoint, and the fact that don't California, Texas sort of situation, well, don't PADI that, because obviously if in the hypothetical references as to what should have been brought forward in the year of 2009, as I made genuine attempts to do so, those particular failures as to those civilian recreational scuba divers in that reference of, and to this day for, because that factor has not occurred to this day. While I have posted pictures, while I have updated my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, through my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com, in conjunction to that 3-volume book series, The Adventures of Susan Mealing, Scuba Diver Extraordinaire, if it was actually taken seriously by those civilian recreational lazy scuba divers, again, as per their own descriptions themselves, and I doubt that I'm the only person who's ever been told that it's recreational scuba diving or lazy scuba diving by said individuals and others, especially in comparison to myself having earned 26 scuba diving certifications on my own without a dating partner in scuba diving, without a marital partner in scuba diving, without a mommy and or daddy in scuba diving, because I actually earned the 26 scuba diving certifications on my own. And that is an extremely important factor as to the difference between recreational, lazy, civilian scuba diving in comparison to my style of scuba diving. Now, while I obviously did not graduate basic training, as I have brought forward, I also didn't really necessarily go into too much detail. I did inform them that I was invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. And in that reference as to what would be considered per standard As to the Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, if certain protocols are not met by a certain time frame, then that gets locked down. DARPA has had a few individuals bring forward those particular factors, among others in regards to the armed forces of the United States of America. So usually what occurs is a 10-year period where that is not brought up, that is not discussed. So I earned my 26 scuba diving certifications in the year of 2009. And in the year of 2019 is when I actually started bringing that forward. And so anybody who has intelligence and common sense in that particular factor would know that that would be the standard time frame as to the 10 years regarding the factors of bringing my books forward regarding the adventures of Susan Meling, Scuba Diver Extraordinaire, those 3-volume book series, which yes, they were authored correctly. Just so that's known, because if you take a look in reference to Finding a Silver Lining, especially the original copy of, that is the reason for. If you take a look at my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, the reason why it reiterates itself is for people who would read my journal blog that might lack common sense, to be capable to have that intellect as a reminder. I suppose I can make a joke or at the very minimum sarcastic comment. There's this song by KMFDM called New American Century, and one of the males in that particular band says, repeat it, repeat it. And anybody who's ever spoken with me in person, face-to-face in person, and or has paid attention to any of my other official YouTube video channels, again, videos for my channel, please do make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel. Hypothetically, I might repeat a few things, though that's probably because of the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I wonder, should I make a sarcastic comment or joke that I've had to repeat it so many times because of the lack of common sense regarding a few individuals to take into consideration the facts? I don't know if that could be considered as that, but that would be up to those civilian, recreational, lazy scuba divers to take in consideration, and or any other individuals, such as whichever Democrats have had problems in reference to my choice to vote Republican. And yes, I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I grew up going around the tri-state area, which anybody who knows the tri-state area of New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, it is a heavily populated Democratic, not Democratic in regards of just voting, but Democrat viewpoint as to. And yes, I decided to be a Republican because of my belief of my capabilities to actually earn money in comparison to that Democratic way, where in those references, the only way that they seem to make money, I suppose, would be through the political measures in comparison to actual work, because that would be the facts in any hypothetical that would be capable to be found in that, such as in that California way in regards of the population aspect. So, while some people might think that I would agree to that just because maybe, just maybe, I just forgot it. No. I have been working to do so for quite a few decades. I have been a capitalist since I was a teenager. The second I found out that I could earn my own finances to get away from that particular section of was as much as I could do to not have to deal with those types of individuals that would think that that would be the way to go. What I earn on my own is what I'm supposed to earn on my own due to my own work. So because of that particular type of situation, you can see in reference to the technological factor as to a difference. So in that particular factor of individuals who have thought that particular way, instead of actually doing employment to earn finances in the correct capacity in comparison to those hypotheticals of Well, experience matters. And so with experience, such as the year of 2004 in my backyard regarding San Antonio, as well as from my childhood and my teenage years in the state of New Jersey, the Atlantic area, the ocean, in the state of Indiana during the year of 1999, among some times in regards of Illinois, and then of course the year of 2004 regarding the state of Texas, and of course of the year of 2011 in Irving in the state of Texas. Those particular factors which are not within the Freedom of Information Act because of the requirements regarding clearance backgrounds. And again, I was invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. So individuals who actually take their employment seriously, because anybody who would know about the Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, especially an invitation to that particular school in the year of 1996, common sense would dictate, no, that's not a freedom of information regarding those particular types that think that they have a right to something that they don't have a right to, especially when it comes to national security and world security. So while some individuals might have a problem in regards of thinking maybe, just maybe, they had been a part of something bigger than themselves other than the hypothetical viewpoint of the metaphor regarding the sedition aspects as to the 6th of January in 2021. Maybe that one was a Freudian slip. In that particular reference as to the possibility of maybe there was a technological factor as to the 6th of January in the year 2009. So, in that hypothetical of emails or cell phone records, landline records, because of that Patriot Act, and those particular references as to text messages that I have brought forward, especially in the time frame of my updates to my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which would be the same as www.ladydorybell.com. In that reference where those types of individuals in that civilian recreational scuba diving lazy sector, because obviously if there's any needless problems that they had fun doing in comparison to my work, well, there would be that recreational type. And in reference to actually getting stuff done in a timely manner correctly, well, it's the year of 2022 in comparison to the year of 2009, so that definitely would be considered a lazy factor instead. Obviously, that would be common sense. And you know what? Maybe you could be in elementary school and figure that out. I'm not certain. But those types of those people who would think, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal, and yet it is. And they haven't done anything to fix or repair it correctly. Now, in the hypothetical that any of them might wish in regards of marital aspects, here's the kicker on that. The planned situation as to that hypothetical from the time frame of 2009 onward to whatever possibility of, there were these individuals, I don't know if anybody's heard of this company called Enron. However, in the 1980s, the very late 1980s, there were certain individuals, and then into the 1990s, who thought that if they got married, they could utilize this law where you cannot testify against your spouse. That only works if you were legally married back in the time frame of 2009. However, if you got a divorce, if you were married in the year of 2009, that's out the window legally, automatically. Yes, I know that might be a situation. Now, in that hypothetical of anybody thinking, well, they'll go and do it later to try to cover it up, well, that would be a massively huge red flag automatically, because as in an elementary school age thought process of wishing in that hypothetical that you could utilize that law. Well, obviously that wouldn't be backdated. It would be only from the time of. But that's in elementary school. I mean, I know I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, which is technically elementary school in those particular references. And any of the civilian recreational lazy scuba divers, if they were not recreational lazy scuba divers in comparison to just civilian scuba divers, the facts having been brought forward in the year of 2009 would have occurred in comparison to the hypothetical regarding civilian recreational lazy scuba divers, because only individuals that would be lazy and recreational with their type of scuba diving in the civilian sector would do anything except for what needed to be done immediately, because that's common sense. And so if in the hypothetical somebody decided they thought they could speak with my daughter and or my son in reference to my scuba diving, I don't know what elementary, or maybe it's preschool age, I don't want to assume in this hypothetical, I don't know what thought process would be to that when the obvious as to those scuba diving instructor types would obviously know that the earliest age that they would be allowed to be taught scuba diving in reference to certifications would be at the junior SEAL level, but they wouldn't actually be capable to go in the same way. So in regards of the junior scuba diving, you'd have to be at the age of, I believe it's 16 years old. So seeing how my son was in elementary school still regarding the city of San Antonio as to the junior SEAL scuba diver situations, to begin learning about scuba diving, because I didn't ever speak with my son, nor did I ever speak with my daughter about my scuba diving, other than the fact that I was scuba diving and I was earning another certification. So while they might have been distracted by the shiny objects as to the reference of my pictures when I went to Florida, as to their lack of capability to distinguish between real scuba diver masks compared to elementary age scuba diver, they're not even scuba diver masks, they're actually goggles. And those elementary preschool type of flippers in comparison to scuba diving fins, if they were not capable because they were distracted by the shiny objects of the pictures in this hypothetical, well then what type of civilian scuba dive instructor would those ever be capable to be? I mean, seriously, how would they ever be capable to consider themselves responsible scuba divers or responsible scuba dive instructors ever, when you truthfully take that into consideration? And in regards of how they very much on and on and on throughout the year of 2009 discussed how they really truthfully thought that the scuba diving they did was recreational, well, I suppose in this hypothetical, it would be considered as recreational, because why would they ever take scuba diving seriously? Only individuals who would take scuba diving seriously would actually take care of scuba diving and scuba divers in a serious capacity in comparison to anything lazy. So while in this hypothetical, they thought that I was being lazy in regards of my scuba diving, again, I did inform them that I had been invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, and common sense would dictate that anybody who knows anything about Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, and or known as MAST for short, they would know that there are certain legalities that are mandatory. And since I explained to these civilian recreational scuba divers as to the reality, as to my childhood and my teenage years, my early teenage years, as to going out for the first beach at Point Pleasant, that would be, you know, in the time frame before elementary school, in that reality as to that. So yes, I did attend Marlboro Recreational Camp when I was in elementary school, but that's when I was older in comparison So yes, I did go to Point Pleasant Beach, same as going to Seaside Beach, among a few other beaches, because I had this thing called a babysitter. Her name, Sonia, and her friend Nora, and her children, among others that Sonia had babysat. We went to different beaches, which was before I had attended elementary school. In regards of Asher Holmes Elementary School, which in turn would translate before I had attended Marlboro Recreational Camp, which in turn, there is a difference though when you think about recreational camp and these civilian recreational scuba divers, especially in the year of 2019, as to that hypothetical, those reality factors as to what is considered acceptable in comparison to those types. As to that, again, I haven't ever given permission in regards of my style of scuba diving at all. And that I haven't ever taught. Just for clarifications, in addition to that, since I had registered with the Library of Congress about my scuba diving, legally there wouldn't ever be anybody who'd be allowed to teach in the same way as to those scuba diving certifications, legally, because of the copyrights. And so in that additional factor, obviously there is a difference between civilian, recreational, lazy scuba diving in comparison to my style of scuba diving. Well, I have made the recommendation to not attempt certain things because it is dangerous. Obviously, landing at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, each and every scuba dive would be difficult to survive if you don't have certain training. And so while you might be lucky enough to remember this is the year 2022 compared to the year 2009. Then you have the additional factors as to out from Boca and landing at the bottom of the area of twice for both in regards of that scuba dive where I had found the underwater volcanoes. Then you have the bottom of the ocean where the Vandenberg was sunk all the way down, not just at the top part regarding the deck. No. All the way at the bottom of the ocean, not in reference to where the keel of the ship is. No. Further down. That's why the picture of the bottom of the ocean looks as a rock in comparison to silt, because the silty areas would be, shallower water. And so in that civilian recreational lazy type of scuba diving, in comparison to my work, well, yes, after the minimum time frame that anybody was allowed to do so by the standards as to, and again, anybody who has that particular background, it doesn't matter whether or not they have a civilian employment. If they actually have a civilian employment, such as with something like Deloitte, they literally would know that there are legalities to that. Again, if they didn't have a preschool or elementary school mindset. I don't want to assume. So where those types of people who I didn't ever agree to anything of regarding that hypothetical factor, and I would be the one and only person to have that discussion with those particular hypotheticals as to wishfully thinking that speaking with anyone such as my ex-in-laws and or speaking with elementary aged school children and or speaking with my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister when I myself have the blue ID card of and for the Armed Forces of the United States of America and the one and only sponsor additionally to that, then would be a problem regarding investigatory situations. So while yes, in the year of 2019, after the year of 2018, in reference to my Medal of Honor art project, which again, there are those particular factors that a Medal of Honor in those regards is not awarded to people who don't have a military background. So if they didn't sign the dotted line for whichever branch, such as the Army, or the Air Force, or the Coast Guard, or the Marine Corps, and or the Navy, that aspect too is not a right. Freedom of religion. I have brought up that I'm an ordained reverend. And so that freedom of religion regarding myself, well, then there's that factor to additionally take in consideration. Now, there were news reports in regards of the lifeguard shortage as to maybe that has additionally to do with civilian recreational scuba divers. Well, maybe if they actually took their employment seriously in comparison to being lazy recreational scuba divers as to the instructor factor, maybe, just maybe, they should have taken that into consideration. So since I do not play games, I know that I had a GameStop account, so that way I purchased at that time for my son and my daughter regarding the Nintendo Switch and the Xbox and the PlayStation. That was for that time frame in comparison. And again, I don't play games. Just because I physically look as I do as to what those civilian recreational scuba divers had made their opinions known in the time frame of the year 2009, just as a bunch of Democrats throughout the state of Texas, from the starting point as to my hairstyle and my tattoos beginning in the year of 2000, well, more so 2006, I had dealt with a bunch of Democrats in reference to a location that I had volunteered at. They had their issues, that their own psychosis problems, as to just accepting those facts as to, I don't know, I heard that there were some who had a head injury a few years back, and maybe they can understand now that when it comes to TBI in their case, I mean, it's technically considered as a TBI, though it's also known as a head injury. Those particular memory deficits and cognitive disorders I warned about. And then if you deal with headaches and or migraines, those particular factors as preventative measures to make sure as to the overall aspects as to safety might seem a smidgen more important in comparison to those viewpoints. And since the reference as to those types regarding Democrats, well, in the Democratic way, tattoos are not the same, unless they want them in that way. Because if they want them in that particular way, as to the Democrat way, well, then that would translate to something as similar as the Holocaust, as to those particular factors in comparison to that Republican way, where you have choice in comparison. And since I've taken my work seriously, obviously, since I was the only one who could take my work seriously, as to if there were those, well, then they would have spoken with me in person, face-to-face in person, in genuine truth, in comparison to any type of pretending, in comparison to any type of recreational aspect, in comparison to that. Now, there is a difference, since I know regarding my modeling going by the name of Lady Dory Bell, and in reference to, well, yes, Susan Mi Ling, that's my legal first name and my legal middle name. I understand in regards to situations such as whether it's news reporting, whether it is movie aspects, whether it is in reference to television shows, whether in reference to podcasts, and those particular factors. I very much understand the difference as far as that is considered. However, especially in regards of my Medal of Honor art project trips, I took that seriously. I take my work seriously because I haven't had the luxury of lazy type of work. I haven't ever had the luxury of recreational types of work. I haven't had that luxury where somebody such as a mommy and or a daddy, however you view that, has actually done stuff like that for me. I haven't had those luxuries. Obviously, when you take in such considerations. So for the fact as to my house that I had created to be my home in Carrollton, Texas, where I had worked very diligently for that, as to all of the interior painting, that is wiped away. I don't need somebody else to paint my house for me. I could do that myself. I wouldn't ever want that either, because why would I want those people's energy in my house? If that were to ever be a thing in comparison. See, I can get a new house instead of that because of the choice factor. I wouldn't view that the same way because you don't need to be preschool or elementary school age to figure that out. Or maybe you do, I don't know, because, you know, common sense as to those factors, because that doesn't make up for anything as to those situations. And while some people might think that, oh, that might make up for, why would it? So I could walk around a house that I should have been capable to walk around for the past, well, since 2010, for the past 12 years. Why would I ever want to see that? I mean, I wouldn't think it would take common sense to figure that out. I would think it would be common sense that I would pick my own location instead. And I mean, you know, why would I want to look at the walls of a location that I should have been capable to stay in for the past 12 years? And instead, all of the needless problems that occurred. Obviously, anybody who would have common sense would know that I would be a smidgen dominant as to that, and I would do it my way, because what would ever be common sense in that hypothetical? So, well, yes, I am quite upset regarding what was my home at that point in time beforehand. That was then. That time frame that I didn't get to watch my son grow up with my daughter in what house I created as our home, that cannot be undone. Common sense as to that, unless those levels of intellect are lower than preschool and elementary school age. So in those references as to those really important factors as to actual discussions with me in person, face-to-face in person, well, there are many reasons that that would be considered important if you take things seriously in comparison to in that civilian, recreational, lazy way. Because anybody that would think in that recreational, lazy way wouldn't ever take in consideration the time of being a mom that had been stolen from me. That time of being a mom in the house that I had created as my home for my family. Not other people's family, my family. Well, only a recreational, lazy individual would ever think that that would ever be capable to make up for 12 years. And any individual who would think so, think that that wouldn't be that big of a deal, I don't know what that level of lack of intellect above preschool or elementary school would be. At all. Because obviously my son is no longer in elementary school and my daughter is no longer in elementary school. And so since they are no longer in elementary school and the amount of time as far as those factors are concerned, instead, well, I have had other situations that I have begun work on, such as my Medal of Honor art project, such as my books, such as my website, such as my official YouTube channel. Again, thank you for your support. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel. And if you're going to leave a comment, make sure to have etiquette and respect, not in a recreational or lazy way. Please make sure to have intelligence. That would be far more appropriate and preferred in comparison. So in those references as to, since my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological little sister might not have thought that the situations were as serious and severe regarding the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, that would be a mistake that those people would have made. Similarly, in reference to my ex, and remember, ex-in-laws in those particular references. I obviously wouldn't want to be in certain vicinities as to which one of my ex-sisters-in-law who had complained about certain things, well, I've had my right as far as to choose. And as many Democrats have said supposedly right to choose and supposedly my body, my choice, you would think that they wouldn't be recreational or hypocritical or lazy about that, which it has been brought up, not just in reference to myself having brought that up. There are others, such as people in regards of Fox News, who have brought that forward regarding those types of individuals as to those factors. And so when you take in consideration the difference as to those situations, I have always taken my work seriously in comparison to what other people hypothetically thought. And so in regards of my fact-based books, those fact-based books, in comparison to my knowledge, my understanding, and my comprehension of the difference between my fact-based books to fiction genres. Now, I know and I understand and I comprehend that fiction genres can be seen in metaphors. I knew that. However, it doesn't change the fact that I authored those fiction genres as to books in the fictional capacity because common sense would dictate that. And so while I did not ever allow any factors of regarding anybody ever using my work at all. I also didn't ever want anybody regarding in those references except for where I published my books through. I didn't need those types of those people to do the work that I was working on because I knew what I was doing. I have had the intellect this entire time. It's just that those types of those people have needed to accept the facts. They've needed to accept accountability for their own stupidity because that's their responsibility for their choices to have elementary in regards of their thought processes, in my opinions only, unless there's proof that would show otherwise. So, while some people might have wished that I might have been calmer, well, in reality, when you take in consideration the conglomerate of what I've dealt with, anybody who has common sense would be capable to think about the conglomerate of everything that I have brought forward that I have dealt with and how calm I've actually been. Anybody that would ever wish that their temper tantrums in comparison to how I've handled things to this length of time, well, then there are these references in this hypothetical as to whether or not their responses have been capable to maintain and sustain maturity in those references, especially to the length of time. So anybody that would have ever thrown a temper tantrum with the proof of, in this hypothetical of course, in less time for any combined circumstance at all, whatsoever, would have to be capable to stand the test of my time. So, there were these problems in reference to the state of Illinois, where I wasn't interested in ever moving to the state of Illinois in the year of 1998. While there are those individuals who may have convinced my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological little sister that they needed to be a part of something that they weren't invited to be a part of and or cause needless problems because of whatever hypotheticals that would be capable to be found, I very much do hope, in those references as to any needless drama that my minor-aged son and or my minor-aged daughter and or myself needlessly dealt with because of those types of elementary type of lack of intelligence, in my opinion, thought processes, that it wouldn't be considered that big of a deal. Well, my son and my daughter and I dealt with that. And remember, I was in labor and delivery in the hospital in the year 2001 for 7 days before I delivered my son. And that's after the several days of already having been in labor. Then in the year 2002, the exact same thing. So while having a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain during that time frame, similarly to those 12 years that can't be gotten back in regards of my house, what was my home for my family and I, that particular situation as to that cannot be undone in any capacity of. Just as the past 12 years cannot be undone as to what I needlessly have went through in the hypothetical of, the same thing in regards to how my son can't be undone as to those situations. My daughter can't be undone as to those situations. So that, as to those factors, to what was my house, and only my house. There was nobody else's name that was on the paperwork for my house, which is extremely important in reference to the legalities as to any hypothetical of anybody who would wish to think that speaking with my son and or my daughter for any hypothetical as to recording, there was only one person to speak with, and that one person legally in every capacity would be myself. So in that reference as to that hypothetical, again, I took things seriously because I'm actually a serious individual in comparison to those recreational lazy types, whether or not civilian recreational scuba divers. So in reference to the 6th of January 2021 factor, as to the 2020 election cycle, as to the obvious capability of the physical viewpoint as to the rallies in support of the re-election of President of the United States of America 45, as to the references I brought forward in my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, as to the updates in regards from the year of 2019 into the year 2020 regarding my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribell.com. Those software programming situations as to any hypothetical aspects of. Now, I have brought up my background and the capacity of anybody who has any technology background, specifically coding, would be capable to see that aside from the facts as to the KMD FDM song regarding New American Century, regarding repeating. And so anybody who has that particular knowledge as to what that would look as, well, I know about hashtags. I've known about them. So those individuals who may have only thought in regards of my biological mother who had been an information technology software designer or engineer, well, that's different in comparison. There are reasons as to why I was invited to Marine and Science Technology School with a Navy attachment. In comparison, I took work seriously. You know, seeing how I had certain experiences from my childhood and my teenage years. Before the year 2004, being a biological adult. So in regards of the 6th of January, which would be in regards of numerical factors, I'm going to get into spiritual numbers or numerology, for those who understand it. 1 and 6, whether 16 as to the year of 1996, Marine and Science Technology School, for those references. 2021, which would be backwards 1 year, 2 weeks, and 2 days as to the birth of my son and birth of my daughter time frame, or the number 5, you know, the 5 elements, air, fire, water, earth, and spirit, and or in reference to that 5-pointed star regarding my Medal of Honor art project. Hypothetically, if regarding the unknown areas as to AI, as to coding, well. Would that be 2,021 miles as to the point in time in this hypothetical as to any needless problems regarding the situations that my daughter dealt with, and then my having driven back and forth as to when those particular factors would kick in. The irony, the 16 scuba diving certification smorgasbord as well, regarding my scuba diving certifications in total of 26. In comparison, you'd have to have a non-elementary school viewpoint as to that hypothetical regarding civilian recreational lazy scuba divers. And you'd have to be capable to explain it if you had that capacity. So in the reference as to how the court hearings regarding the sedition, I know they say the year 2021, but would it be 2021 miles? As to the hospital visits where I drove from what was my home, remember that, to the hospital my daughter was in, whichever one, and back to my home. So would that in reference be to the year of 2009 as to the starting point regarding what was my home in Carrollton, Texas, back and forth to Denton and Carrollton? Would that include, and at what point in time would it be, to 2,021 miles from what was my home in Carrollton, Texas, to Denton, Texas, and back to Carrollton, Texas, in conjunction from Carrollton, Texas to White Settlement, Texas, to Fort Worth, Texas, to Denton, Texas, and then backwards from Denton, Texas, to Fort Worth, Texas, to White Settlement, Texas, back to my house. That was my home in Carrollton, Texas. How many times of the back and forth from Carrollton, Texas to Denton, Texas, and back to Carrollton, Texas, would it take to those miles? Because I visited my daughter each possible time frame regarding her stay in Denton in the year of 2009. Same thing in reference to the year of 2010, both times, before she had been transferred to Merrill Hill regarding the state of Texas, near Austin. Now I know for a fact it wouldn't take long from Carrollton, Texas to Liberty Hill area of Texas and back to Carrollton, Texas, before that would equal 2,021 miles. However, would it be feasible regarding those drives in the end of the year of 2009 into the beginning of the year of 2010, both times to equal 2,021 miles, before or after the Fort Worth Zoo, as to the McCoy Elementary School, Carrollton Farmers Branch Independent School District in Carrollton, Texas, as to a different version of a sedition regarding the hospital aspects, where my daughter had already been brought forward as to needing the assistance as to special needs care in the years of 2008 into 2009, though in the year of 2010, before the Fort Worth Zoo situation, my daughter had been hospitalized twice in the year of 2010 and once in the year of 2009. So while some people in this hypothetical whether in reference to Carrollton Farmers Branch individuals as to McCoy Elementary School, in reference to my modeling, which no, I didn't ever tell my son or my daughter that I had been doing modeling. There wasn't any point in time. Similarly, I did not discuss my scuba diving in reference to my son or my daughter, other than I was scuba diving. And that's it. So while other individuals, whether in regards of the Bally's Total Fitness that I used to attend, and those types of females in that reference, because I was preparing myself for the work I needed to do. And so those types of small town individuals, as to their knowledge, as they learned that I was born and raised in New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s, and whatever references of in those regards. But though the political climate, this is why politics shouldn't be involved in any school system, because whether it's a public school system, though that doesn't translate to the general public being allowed, obviously, common sense factors, and or in reference to private schools, unless it's specifically specified, which obviously parents and legal guardians should have the right to choose whether or not they want their children or what have you to ever attend a school in that capacity, because that would be in regards of a private school, similar to how I attended St. John Vianney High School. That's obviously a Catholic parochial high school. That was a choice regarding my biological mother and my biological father, despite the situations that I had been invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. And so if they didn't understand, all they'd have to do is take in consideration that year of 1996, from January of 1996 through the time frame of when I had attended for the testing in reference to the equivalent of ASVAB, the essays, as well as the 3 interviews to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. For those who wouldn't know, let me clarify for that. In the year of 1996, my big blood brother had been in a car accident with his dad. My biological mother and my biological father did not allow me to attend my big blood brother's funeral. His name was Damien. He lived next door, or Damien Menendez to be specific. He lived next door to my babysitter, Sunny Sonia, and her husband's house, Joe Jose, and their 2 children, David and Liza. I grew up being babysat in regards to next door. It's literally, I consider myself a female though, girl next door. So while other people made fun of me for going to a babysitter as a child, as they attended, or after they had attended his funeral, comparison, then there's the fact that that was the same year that my biological mother and my biological father decided to inform me about my Bakong and my grandpa Gavet, which similarly, as to that particular factor regarding those types of situations, then I had entered a poster contest in reference to the oceanic water cleanup. And in entering that contest, which I was supposed to enter with a female named Maria Gonzalez, but we had differences of opinion as to how the posters would actually be. And so when she decided to act in the way that she decided to act, I decided to do my own poster in comparison. And so Marlboro Middle School was one of the schools who apparently had someone who had created a poster that had been impressive enough for Governor Christine Todd Whitman to actually want to meet and discuss with. And so as I had informed my biological mother and my biological father upon meeting Governor Christine Todd Whitman, after the situations regarding the lineup alphabetically as to being allowed to ask one question regarding the governor and how that went, and then the bus ride, and after my question was when those particular factors went. So everybody else had asked, what is it like to be the governor of New Jersey? I had asked, I have a friend whose mom works at the only mental health facility in the state of New Jersey, and your administration is looking at closing that down. What are you going to do to make sure the mental health situations in regards of, as well as the employment for? And then there were no more questions. As far as that particular, I was in 8th grade, by the way. And so I was invited after that, before I was invited, I had earned my way through the Taekwondo circuit as a green belt to then go to the international Taekwondo competition, where as a green belt in 8th grade, as a 12-year-old, I had earned 2nd place in sparring and 3rd place in form. And then I was invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. I don't know what my biological mother and or my biological father thought in those references to a kind of overall view, though I would guesstimate there could be some people who could look at those particular combinations, as well as the fact, hypothetically, to be invited to attend a school such as Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. Well, they probably would have spoken with my babysitter's husband, who was a director of security in the World Trade Center and the World Trade Center Plaza, as well as his wife, and hypothetically, they would have informed MAST for short about my nightmare from when I was in 2nd grade and how I had brought up a fertilizer smell as to a vision regarding a white van. Actually, it was more than one in my vision for that clarification. However, nonetheless, there were actually in my vision or my nightmare back as a child in 2nd grade, I saw 7 or 8 white vans or unmarked type of vans that had funny smells. As far as I think it's called clairsentience, clairsustenance, clairvoyance, and a few other aspects in conjunction to mediumship. And so, hypothetically, that recommendation from someone such as my babysitter's husband, who was a director of security for the World Trade Center and the World Trade Center Plaza, would be different than what my biological mother and or my biological father may have thought at all. Sure, my biological father had earned the work that he had done regarding the certification for the School of Bulova, which it probably hypothetically would have been known that he had business in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and the School of Bulova being capable to work on Bulova watches, Seiko watches, Rolex watches, Movado watches, those really high-end watches, as well as clocks of all different types. Hypothetically, MAST could have seen something in conjunction to my biological mother having worked in information technology, software, and engineering design at Prudential. In conjunction to all those other factors, as well as attending Old Tennant Presbyterian Church. So I was invited to attend. I wasn't invited to apply. No one is invited to apply, although maybe now more recently. No, I was invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, the year in 1996. There's also the fact of having attended Marlboro Middle School, and there's my science projects in that public middle school, as well as woodworking, as far as that would be concerned. So hypothetically, maybe somebody could see a reason or two as to the conjunction of assisting my biological father build a 5-car garage with a shed attached. Hypothetically, maybe somebody could see something that hypothetically would be a smidgen valuable in comparison to what my biological mother and or my biological father, and especially my biological little sister, may have thought in that similarity to those civilian recreational scuba divers in that lazy capacity, hypothetically. In that hypothetical, of course. Well, I suppose now on the 8th of June, 2022, in that regard, hypothetically, in that duh sort of way, in comparison, certain factors instead of that civilian, recreational, lazy aspect, there could be a few things as to why I would earn 26 scuba diving certifications total. And yes, by the civilian recreational scuba diver way, that would be the actual top level of would be the cavern scuba diving certification. However, that problem to actually get my paperwork in time to the September, at the very latest of October 2009, well, if anybody had asked about my top certification and anybody lied, because I had earned by that point officially the cavern scuba diving certification would actually be above that advanced open water. However, in that hypothetical, because I refused to become an open, a national, or I refused to become a scuba diver instructor, just as I refused to go to Disney. And since Patty Stewart had one of those yearly sort of passes and all that, and she couldn't believe why I would ever not want to attend Disney, even though I informed her how horrific the one time I had attended Disney had been. She didn't understand why I didn't want to go to Disney. I would guesstimate if she were to be stuck inside of the It's a Small World ride, just in one reference compared to multiple days in a row, multiple times, a minimum of 3 each time for a 7-day, 6-night trip, I would guesstimate just being stuck in the tunnel for those several hours with the music still going, she might hypothetically be capable to understand why that one trip was enough for me to not be interested to go to Disney, despite other things. And so, you know, some people have levels of comfort, and so I don't have any comfort level regarding a situation in that capacity at all, especially dealing with headaches and migraines. Anybody who has common sense, you know, wouldn't ever think that going to an amusement park where there's a bunch of screaming children all over the place in the middle of the daytime with the sunlight, and then whatever the sidewalk colorations and all of the whatever noisemakers and the different rides and the music and so on and so forth. Anybody with common sense wouldn't need that explanation in reference to, no offense to Disney, I still like Disney movies. It just seems like that would be being stuck in a live version of Fantasia. And I didn't like that movie at all. That movie just no thank you. So in that civilian recreational scuba diving sector, as to those particular factors in that hypothetical, if anybody from such as the Coast Guard, well then what did you repeat as to a pattern of behavior in reference to my scuba diving in that civilian recreational lazy sort of way in comparison to my style of scuba diving, because no respectable scuba dive instructor would ever do anything in a recreational, lazy way regarding scuba diving, especially as an instructor. No one would do that if they took their licensing and their insurance requirements seriously in reference to being a scuba dive instructor. No one would. Because if they were to, well then it would be known what type of those civilian recreational scuba divers that would be produced. In comparison, because while there are individuals such as, I call them MRARs, but there's MARSOC. I don't know if they do scuba diving, they might. And there's obviously who I call Navy SEAL, but the SEALs and other types of special forces that for their employment, you know, scuba diving is not a recreation. Scuba diving is not something you can be lazy in at all. And so any guy with a military background, sure, of course, I didn't graduate basic training, though if they were to learn, especially to that invitation to mast, as well as especially in regards of, well, I grew up going out to the various beaches along the shoreline, and my babysitter, who was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, you know, that island area, she had taken me out to the oceanic areas. And so certain factors that certain types of individuals would have a bit of a knowledge as to certain situations. Well, I grew up swimming out to the buoys and back. Sometimes I would swim to, you know, along the side of the jetties and so on and so forth. They could probably take that in consideration as to, well, that's a different type of swimming out off of the New Jersey shoreline. And then that Marine and Science Technology School invitation with the Navy attachment, possibly in comparison to civilian recreational lazy scuba divers, because duh. And so in comparison, of course, obviously in comparison, then there's those other factors as to, well, that's nice. As far as certain other individuals, I actually have to be capable to trust, especially in reference to the seriousness as to the development of certain things, such as my creations. And so if I can't trust that, especially because of that civilian recreational lazy factor, well, the bidding aspect as to my creation, well, I'd have to have certain viewpoints and guarantees and certain aspects as to any needless problem at all, to my work in any capacity, in that recreational, lazy way. Well, obviously, I've taken my work seriously as a sort of way in comparison. So yes, I know I physically look as I do. I also have had the background I have, and so those military and law enforcement types of individuals, they might be capable to distinguish the difference between just looking at how I earned 26 scuba diving certifications, and yes, I completed the 16 scuba dive certification smorgasbord of the different specialties. I also earned another 10 scuba diving certifications. However, I completed that 16 scuba diver specialty course. As far as that was concerned, isn't it an irony the 16th of April in 2000 would be the day of Palm Sunday? So anyway, that would be that in those comparisons. So yes, I know in the factors as to when I was in second grade and a few other situations where people were just, oh, well, she's just a child, you know, children have whatever. You know, legal tenant and that. And then I had been invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment for a reason, though I don't know what my biological mother and or my biological father would need to actually understand the difference between applying to attend MAST to being invited to attend MAST. Though if those hypotheticals as to the different individuals who showed up to the house and how I went from Marlborough High School to St. John Vianney High School, they signed the paperwork as far as that emancipation back in the year of 1996 for me. I was emancipated from them officially back then. I don't know what they would really need as a sign as to this amount of time as far as the difference. So they legally even still would have no authority to ever do anything on my behalf because of 1996. Obviously, anybody who would have intelligence, such as common sense, you wouldn't need to be in elementary school to figure that out. So, you know, in that hypothetical, anybody who has a military background and or a law enforcement background most specifically, though if you don't, hypothetically, you could just have common sense and figure that out as to why. And so, you know, in comparison to wishful thoughts, so legally, I didn't even have to have their signature regarding the Army, which I had explained to my Army recruiter. And so my biological mother and my biological father fought with the Army recruiter as to that paperwork because they didn't seem to understand they needed to accept the fact that legally, when they signed the paperwork for me to go through the process in reference to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, legally, they had no parental rights at all whatsoever in the year of 1996 regarding myself, legally. Which I understood this, the Army recruiter made attempts to explain that to them, and anybody who's made attempts to explain something to my biological mother, well, you know how tears quickly form in that reference, and those whining factors in that, in the overdramatic situations. And then in reference to my biological father, well, you would know how angry he gets when you point out facts. And so, especially if they disagree with his feelings or his opinion. And so usually, especially in reference to New Jersey and Illinois, usually what he would do is pick up items and throw them and then start smashing things with all, actual hammers and stuff like that in comparison. Additionally, he usually would get in what others understand, especially the Marine Corps, most specifically the Marine Corps. Think of like Arlie Ermy, but, not, because that's Hollywood in comparison. So anybody who's had any experiences, though, you might be capable to understand that reference, hypothetically, and that's what I grew up with. So in my opinion, and I acknowledge it is a biased opinion, with what I grew up with and what I grew up around, I would guesstimate even the most judgmental individuals who wouldn't have any right to be judgmental, nonetheless, even the most judgmental individuals, hypothetically, could say, I am a well-rounded, well-adjusted individual in comparison in that hypothetical. So yes, I earned my 26 scuba diving certifications and handled all that work all by myself. And so in the references of all these other factors, such as that hypothetical as to sedition regarding when my daughter was hospitalized in the month of January in the year of 2010, and or when she had been hospitalized anywhere else in the month of January, such as 2011 and or 2012, as to any sedition regarding individuals who did not have any right nor any authority to have anything to do with my minor-aged daughter and or my minor-aged son, being that I'm the one and only sponsor and I'm the one and only surviving biological parent. And so those particular hypotheticals as to any of those civilian, recreational, lazy scuba divers, as to any possibilities, such as my neighbors in the Carrollton area of Texas, as far as that's concerned. There's a song by Carrie Underwood called Blown Away. And that's kind of my opinion in regards of a few things, to a degree. And so, as to those who would think it would be recreational in that capacity compared to how I've always taken things seriously. I've actually dealt with people in what's supposed to be considered the consenting adult lifestyle, such as BDSM and swingers. I have been told multiple times that they don't understand how I could be so serious. I would bring up that I was born and raised in New Jersey, and before I could ever say anything else, I would usually be met with, well, what do you remember? In comparison to actually letting me speak, and or whatever questions they would ask or their opinions, though usually 9 times out of 10 when I was asked that, I was going to say, well, I was born and raised in New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s, and in the 1980s and 1990s, there was this huge epidemic and pandemic that went through the New York City, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia, as well as state and New Jersey areas. And so I take this seriously because I knew a lot of people who were personally impacting in my life. And so I grew up with certain individuals, and this is before the year of 1993. However, because of the lack of patience and maturity to actually bring that part forward during those years, because of how quick and snappy such types of responses were during those time frames. Again, another reason why I've been very slow to get involved with certain things, because of who I grew up with and who I personally lost. So while they usually thought of if I was capable to bring up people I lost from that time frame, while they referred to, well, you weren't there in 2001, it doesn't change that at all, that I was born and raised in New Jersey in the tri-state area, though it also doesn't change those memories from my childhood as to people I once knew. And while I made attempts to bring up that my babysitter's son had earned his way to work at the Gap because of a Christmas display that was a competition at the time, to work at the headquarters in New York City, they didn't understand what I was making attempts to refer to, because I didn't have the words to explain. So apparently that's considered gay, which is an irony, because in Christmas carols, there's a few references to gay old time. And so irony. However, in my defense, I was a child, and so I didn't really care about the terminology. So in my defense, after my head injury, in my coma, and waking up and all that, I didn't care about what it was called, because the label meant nothing to me. It was more along the lines of other human beings. That meant more to me in comparison. So, but that makes that Republican aspect, because only in reference to the scientific portions as to medical care, in my opinion, does any of that matter. So yes, in medical care, whether or not you're LGBTQP, whatever, yeah, that might be important, especially in regards of health and wellness, not necessarily certain other viewpoints from prior years as to the mental health factors, more along the lines of just the reality of the physical and sexual wellness. Personal opinion, so as a Republican, I just view people as people. In comparison, since I'm not an MD, since I'm not a whatever version of in that particular way, I don't personally view people in that capacity. So that's why personally, I just haven't, it's not that I don't care about people, I do. I just don't care about that aspect of in the way that Democrats tend to do, because in the South, especially in the Midwest, they need those labels, in my opinion, similar in some ways to World War II aspects, because if you take a look at the way the World War II aspects were to Germany, that's one of many labels that they had done in comparison. So those who know or have researched details regarding the history as to the different individuals, as to the Holocaust, they didn't just hold Jews or Hebrews. They had all sorts of individuals, and all of them had different labels, literally. They had a symbol as to what labeled them, as to who they were. not as a human being, just in that reference. That's why personally I've had an issue in regards of certain types of Democrats, not all, because the Northern Democrats look more at science, not in which is supposed to be, I should clarify. In the Northern aspects, it is supposed to be in an ethical and moral capacity as to the scientific viewpoint in comparison to those types that would be in those capacities in comparison. So in that ethical and moral way, compared to the hypotheticals as to what occurred as to my scuba diving because of being a Republican, and or time frames before my scuba diving, such as individuals in the Democratic Party in the city of San Antonio, and or having driven through Austin, despite how I physically look, and then in the DFW area as too, because only in what is supposed to be the ethical and moral capacity as to the scientific portions, such as the ethnic background, well, there is that. But in a general public way, that means nothing. So, I mean, personally, to me, because whatever your ethnic background is, I don't personally care. I can see, I have the capacity to see, I dress myself, I'm just saying, and I can see how my outfits look. I know the color of my hair, especially when it's not at a color that I personally prefer at all. Nonetheless, in those references as to what's ethical and moral, because you have to have consent from the individual in comparison, because if you don't have consent, it's not ethical, it's not moral. That's what consent has to do with. Nonetheless, if in that hypothetical as to any factor of the failure to pay attention to details regarding what is considered as, whether in regards of my biological little sister, as to her having attended college in the state of Texas. And those factors, because you cannot be proud to be an aunt and actually care and do those particular aspects in any capacity of regarding my son and my daughter. Obviously, because then that goes to the proof in regards of New Jersey and Illinois as to that hypothetical metaphor to the 6th of January 2021 compared to. And so if it was actual in the capacity of sedition to the scuba diving school as to the lack of permission in regards of my lack of permission and those factors, well then there's that, especially in regards of that abomination of a wedding in regards of the Miller situation, which irony if you take the initials of H and M but you do the negative sign, well, you don't have the omega factor. Obviously. I can make that sarcastic joke, you know, from Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment invitation. You know, and I was 12 years old before I turned 13. You know, I mean, you know, it just is as it is in that hypothetical. And so, in those references as to requirements to follow protocol, nonetheless, So in that civilian recreational scuba diver factor, as to any involvement and or connection to my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister, as far as that capacity, well, again, I'm the one and only sponsor. And so yes, while my children's biological father, yeah, sure, he graduated basic training, that's nice. There's still that JCPenney viewpoint. Had been worn around in the year 2006 throughout various areas of the city of San Antonio. Before the year 2007 to January, I mean, you know, there were multiple areas such as where I was volunteering at the time in regards of San Antonio, you know, by the area of 410. Yeah, 410 and Bandera. Yeah. I mean, you know, that rack might be something that would be known by people in Military City, USA, who actually did graduate basic training, most specifically as to whatever the actual rack would be known as in comparison. So, you know, so that's just one thing my ex-in-laws can take in consideration, that multiple times throughout the year 2006, in Military City, USA, also known as San Antonio, Texas, just walked around in that JCPenney picture costume. So, you know, in that regard, that my ex-in-laws would need to accept accountability as to their responsibility for their stupidity. It's just Military City, USA. There's only 5 military bases in the city of San Antonio, and it's only been renamed Military City, USA. And so since it's the only location in reference to Air Force basic training for enlisted soldier or airmen, I apologize, Army. So enlisted airmen and airwomen regarding Lackland, that's the only basic training location. So how many military could there be? And then the size of the VA hospital and amount of VA in Military City, USA. It's just known as Military City, USA, as in also known as San Antonio, Texas, though it's now known as Military City, USA. There's only 5 military bases there. I know Kelly isn't considered a military base because it's considered retired, and yet at the same time, it's still ironically military. Similar to Randolph Brooks, well, that used to be 2 and it was combined as 1. So that's that. So technically 6 military bases in the city of San Antonio. And how many people in the state of Texas regarding the veteran status, as far as, especially regarding, you know, a certain ribbon on that rack that would be known to someone, and in comparison to, you know, what was my ex-in-law's dead relative's age in the year of 2006 compared to, he was born in 1976 for other people to think about. So he was born in 1976 and he was running around with Grandpa Nichols's rack in conjunction to other. So if people were to look at my ex-in-laws pictures that they took during the funeral, compare it to that JCPenney picture, well, in comparison to the 3 or 4 rows, there was like 1.5. And in comparison to the other side with ropes and ribbons, well, it wasn't. And so, you know, there might be, you know, it was just that he was walking around San Antonio, Texas. For those who don't know, it's called Military City, USA. You can Google it as far as the number of military bases and VA facilities, because it's the state of Texas. So however many people in the state of Texas, I would have a military background. So just, just throughout the entire year randomly from about January-ish throughout the year 2006, because that was about the time frame, January of 2006. Irony regarding the 6th of January 2021. And that would definitely be sedition in a different capacity to guys who actually earned valor. In comparison, that would definitely be considered sedition, as well as seditious, scandalous, disgusting, disgraceful, an abomination, as far as quite a few other factors regarding, honorable in comparison to that in what is now known as Military City, USA, also known as San Antonio. Nonetheless, it was just from the time frame of January 2006, randomly worn throughout different areas of San Antonio, Texas, before he had packed that to be shipped when he went overseas. And so anybody who knows how military trunks are packed and looked through, and if you don't, and you've been overseas, well, you know what your trunk was packed as before you went overseas compared to what the trunk looked as when you received it when you were overseas. And so however many stops, as far as that's concerned, for those who don't understand that, that's called a version of customs. And so those particular references as to that hypothetical, as far as that dress blues, might be considered seditious, as far as that's concerned, before, getting to Leal Air Force Base, before being sent to Germany and then back to San Antonio. How many places could that military trunk and stuff been looked through before then wearing that on Fort Sam Houston? Inside of Military City, USA, and then, JCPenney pictures in September of 2007, as well as any other time that he had any visitors or went to go visit anybody. That's all. So in regards of my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological little sister, if they had introduced him to anybody and they acted a bit like, maybe, for example, maybe they were like, I need to go outside and I need to breathe and I don't want, for one example, if they didn't pop off, then there's an example as to that. Or if they had any individuals that were in the neighborhood that they lived in walking by and they just kind of stopped and stared, depending on the age, I wouldn't know. So then there's those capacities as to that hypothetical. So, common sense for my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister in conjunction to my ex-in-laws, because that would be sedition inside of the city of San Antonio, Military City, USA. In my opinion, obviously different as a metaphor, because it's obviously not the same as to the situations regarding what the various news channels have reported as to what is being looked at regarding the 6th of January 2021. And so, and that's just in reference to those who signed the dotted line. That has absolutely nothing to do with their dependents, whether a spouse and or child or children. That's a whole other ball of wax for those to take in consideration, because how many dependents of veterans that were in during Vietnam, for one example, to the state of Texas. I mean, other than my ex-in-laws, because Grandpa Nichols, that's one example. And then, then there's the aspects as to digital images. And so, you know, hypothetically. So there's that as well. And so I earned my 26 scuba diving certifications. And then, of course, while I understand, okay, I have a blue ID card. Yes, I know that. I earned that. I suppose, as far as what I had been informed regarding in the year of 2000 in December. And so I had been informed by the individual in Fort Sam, Houston regarding the medical board, as far as that was concerned. Although I don't remember the medical board. I don't remember testifying in front of the medical board, although there is, you know, it happened at Fort Sam, Houston, because, or as far as medical hold unit before it became warrior transition unit. And I had explained at medical hold unit, just as I had explained to my neurologist and neuropsychologist when I was in basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, as I was informed, there was a point in time where the entire battalion we did a road march, we went out to a field, we were ordered to get into the bleachers, and I had pointed out that there was a row of soldiers that were going to pop up and do something as far as what I figured was a demonstration. And what I remember was there was an announcement regarding this is what a Abrams tank does. And I just remember seeing dirt fly up. That's my only memory and reference to that in the official capacity. And so, and then a few days later was my head injury on Palm Sunday. Sergeant Baber, who had been my escort despite the situations, to medical hold unit, he had met 3 male soldiers who had been in my basic training and recognized me at the time and had informed me that there were no females that had graduated as I was informed. And as to my basic training, because once I had wound up at Fort Sam, Houston, they started dropping out as far as that was concerned. And since it went the way as it had, so I do remember that. I don't remember seeing a tracer. As far as what, I don't actually, I'll be honest, as I am, I haven't ever looked up what an Abrams tank looks as. I don't remember seeing an Abrams tank, though I was told it was coming up from behind, and I remember seeing the dirt fly up about probably 300 to 500 yards in front of the bleachers. The plant life, I've been to Oklahoma since when I was in basic training, and the plants that I saw as far as botany, I didn't see anything that looked as what I saw in the time frame when I went to Oklahoma. I saw more plant life that looked similar to San Antonio. I actually remember there were plants that looked kind of botany-wise similar to the pin oak trees. That looked familiar. Actually, a lot of the plants that were in my San Antonio backyard, despite the 2004 situation, the majority of them looked fairly similar. So the individuals who had the bushes on top of their helmet that looked like that would look similar to the bushes that were green and yellow that separated where the backyard of my San Antonio house was to my garden area regarding the fruits and vegetables. That's what those looked as. Kind of mixed a little bit with, not really Texas sage, though it looks like it could be a similar plant life for that. The sides of the perimeter, I remember they kind of looked more similar to, if you were to know where my house was in San Antonio, the backyard viewpoint from my patio, there was the house across, or the backyards across the street, that a lot of their bushes and trees looked more similar to what was lining the perimeter of where we had road marched to. And I was there in the month of March into April, apparently, of the year 2000, and I don't remember ever being cold. I get cold easily. So, and I was 17 years old. So that particular type of botany, I had looked at the Western Sunset Gardens as to the different USDA zones. I called it my gardening Bible. And so I went through each and every plant to look and see if I could recognize anything aside from doing my gardening. And so those were too small of pictures to recognize anything. So that would be the closest viewpoint as to some of the plant life. So I don't know if there are those who know what my background in the conjunction to what type of military installation, though I don't remember any of the signs that I've seen in reference to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I don't remember those symbols when I had been at Fort Sill, Oklahoma at all. So I don't know if that's important, though there is that to take in consideration. It also was known, I had joked around with my actual recruiter in comparison to who's on my paperwork. I had joked around and told him about how I had driven out to see who I was dating before then and had argued with him about putting a 442 in a Honda Civic. And he asked me, how would I fit a car into another car? And I had said that, no, I meant the engine block. And he had asked why I would ever bring up an engine block for a 442 in a Honda Civic. So I started explaining the mechanisms as far as the speed. And I had informed my recruiter, who had known in reference to Marine and Science Technology School at the Navy attachment, and had argued with Mike and Anna similarly in some ways to the individuals who showed up to the house at the time in New Jersey as to certain factors regarding that. And so I had a few ideas here and there regarding speed, but controlled speed. And so told him about the warning of 127 miles an hour. That's what I was caught at, as to what that particular law enforcement officer said. However, for those who have ever been in a 1993 Honda Civic and seen the speedometer, it was redlined. So, I'm not saying I was going a little faster than 127 miles an hour. What I'm saying is, anybody who has a 1993 Honda Civic, you would know what the actual speedometer maxed out would be. As far as what it says on the speedometer in comparison, and so 5 to the floor. And so I can make that joke in regards of my scuba diving now. Flying to the floor. Because of landing at the bottom of the ocean. And the bottom of the ocean is called the floor. And so... And if you've ever... Yeah. So, yeah. Nonetheless, in regards to how there's that reference of the 5 points in regards to that. And so, anyway, I know there's a lot of metaphors in comparison. So in regards of the 6th of January in 2021, I went to the Marine Corps Museum before I went back to my hotel room, laid down because of the pain levels. I was surprised I lasted as long as I did, to be honest. And so I was also surprised I was capable to get back to the garage. It was... Technology is awesome to assist with that. And so, yeah, and there was that. So, but I went to there is the Pentagon, and that's a 5. Because Pentagon is penta, and penta is 5. So, there's that. In regards to, I can make the joke of 5 to the floor. Although in a different capacity, because there's a ground floor and then there's, you know, other floors that you walk on, because that's usually what you walk on. You usually walk on the floor. Unless you're in a space station and you have 0 gravity, then you probably don't walk, you probably float. I wouldn't know. I haven't had that experience regarding NASA, so, you know, there's that. Nonetheless, so there is that factor of, yeah, there was 2004. It wasn't the first time, it was just the first time that that had occurred, although if in that ironic hypothetical regarding my Zippy, so I had a little yellow bumblebee car as my little VW Beetle. It was yellow and it had a black convertible hood and black leather interior, so I called it my bumblebee car, but I named it Zippy. And so, and I didn't know until I think it was the year 2020 about a movie called Bumblebee. So I don't know if Zippy knew that there was a movie about her. I guess is the way to put it. Nonetheless, it's my childhood and my teenage years and those factors, and so I've updated my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, through my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And so I suppose, I don't know if there's a reference to that oak leaf situation as to my vision quest in the backyard. I suppose in certain other ironic situations. So I guess there are those who know what an oak leaf would translate to. I thought of rank, though I don't know that reference as to a more official capacity, though it is as it is. So in reference to the live footage that's supposed to be in reference to Thursday, tomorrow, the 9th of June, 2022, in reference to the January, or the 6th of January, or 6th January, 2021. Well, there's those factors as to 2020 vision. So you guys have a good day. There's also water, kind of near those areas. There's a little bit of water, like a river. A couple of them, I don't know if anybody's heard of that. There's like this Delaware River somewhere nearby, and then there's kind of, there's a few other rivers nearby, and then there's kind of this area called the Atlantic, of the ocean, or Atlantic Ocean for sure, you know. That's hypothetically a thing that's somewhere near. So, you know, I do identify as a Republican, more because of the conservative aspects in an overall way. And so, is that. And so it doesn't matter to me, obviously, regarding who is in office, unlike that hypothetical reference, because if it mattered to me who was in office in reference to the President of the United States of America during that time frame, I probably wouldn't have earned my 26 scuba diving certifications and completed the work I did, if that political factor actually mattered to me. I probably, you know, in that hypothetical, in comparison to what I dealt with, probably wouldn't have cared. Probably wouldn't have done as much work as I had to earn my 26 scuba diving certifications if it actually mattered to me about the political alignment instead. So while, yes, there was some exceptional teaching aspects, the work that I had completed well before then, well, there was only one person to ask. Be me, as far as that, so. And I have been open to that. I've taken a bit of a break from being out more often for a few reasons. So while yes, I don't know whether or not anybody actually remembered me well before then as to the year 2019, not in reference to the scuba areas, more along the lines of the other areas because of other factors. Some I know did, but I didn't assume until, I shouldn't say I assumed, I didn't assume anybody actually remembered me at all until I started thinking about certain factors because of how many complaints I dealt with throughout the state of Texas as to how I physically look. So there's that, so the modern day book in the book section. So, but then there is that, yes, I obviously had in my journal blog brought up how I viewed certain things regarding who became President of the United States of America 45, Donald J. Trump, and being the Republican I have been for now 22 years. Those situations as to being in Washington State at that particular point in time. And so those types of situations regarding how school is for education, it's not for politicization. Politicalization. Yeah, so school is for education, not for politicalization. And that's something that people have needed to know for a long amount of time. However, I'm sure since voting booths in New Jersey used to be at Asher Holmes Elementary, well, that doesn't translate to that aspect as to what school education is actually for, in my opinion. However, if people in the state of Texas did not know that, regarding McCoy Elementary School, because I don't remember where it had been held, regarding the 2008 year in New Jersey. They used to have election voting booths in the actual elementary school. So I don't know if my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological little sister had informed people in the state of Texas about that. In comparison to 2020, it was held in a library regarding Hayes County. So in those references of those warnings that I made attempts to give repeatedly, so then again, I am a Republican and my biological little sister was in college in the year of 2008 for that election cycle. For anybody who knows how college students are, she married an individual from the Austin area, Texas. I look as I do, and how dare I vote Republican? Yeah, so that's been a situation that others have needed to take into consideration. And so any sedition in those references as to those hypotheticals, well, the proof thereof. And so people have needed to accept accountability for their stupidity, because that's their responsibility to have that accountability in all the references of. And so, in my opinion, I acknowledge a smidgen biasness to that. And so, you know, though in comparison, unlike in other factors, well, there were only irony of ironies. 5 other scuba divers that went with me when going to the Cozumel area, and that's a different version of 5 to the floor. I know that has to come across as a really 2/3 of a pun sort of way. However, it still works. They didn't all go to the floor in the area, unless they went to the floor afterwards regarding Clear Springs and or somewhere else. Though they all did walk on top of the floor. So, you know, on land and on the boat. That's how that goes. I have a twisted sense of humor. And not just because, as a biological female, I cross my legs. Whether I'm standing or sitting sometimes, though, you know, especially when, you know, in a female type of outfit and stuff. So, you guys have a good day. Thank you for your support. Thank you for tuning in to my official YouTube channel video. Make sure to like my official YouTube videos and go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And I will publish the links in reference to the videos in the information section of my official YouTube video regarding where the inspiration to this particular official YouTube video of mine. And again, if you're gonna leave comments, make sure to have etiquette and respect, and go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And there's the to contact form in that reference as well. And you guys have a great day. Today is the 8th of June, 2022. So the 8th of June, 2022.